Okay. Hey everyone. I think we should be good to go with slides. So, that's an evening, and thank you for coming. I understand that was a pretty interesting 2 days, maybe a little bit tiresome, and I hope that you still have a little bit of energy to listen to my talk. My name is Artur, and I'd like to tell you a story how we are at least trying to forget SQL by creating our own data analyst. And actually, you don't need to be afraid. If you don't want to forget SQL, you can actually use it to learn SQL. And that's maybe something that you may be even more interested at. And by the way, can you raise a hand if you have worked with SQL, so you understand how to write queries, stuff like that? Okay, majority. So I talked to the right folks. Cool. And big green button. Just like a quick note, I work for a company called Squire. We create software for barbershops, and as a result, we've got quite a lot of data, like bookings, clients, payments, all of this good stuff. And as I'm a technical person, and of course I have product managers and stuff, I often get questions like how many rental barbers we've got in the last 30 days. Or I need a test account, commissioned barber in New York with over 30 bookings last week. And maybe you have seen requests like this. What are the most common types of SMS? That's my director of finance actually came to me, trying to understand basically where are we spending money. A lot of money, actually. Or maybe even something as simple as find me a barber with this specific email. And by the way, yeah, who am I? I mean, who do they come to? My name is, again, Artur Kuzmin. I am a director of engineering at Squire and a Google developer expert. You won't believe it, on Android. And that's why I'm talking about SQL and stuff now. But life is life. And you can find me on LinkedIn, you can find me on Twitter. I'm always glad to get meaningful connections. So yeah, feel free to connect. Nice. Oh, by the way, and that's a real picture in Australia. I really like to travel. Yeah, and I mean, if you're about traveling, definitely hit me up. Cool. I see a few more phones. But anyway. So, solution that we came up with, that instead of being pinged every now and then about okay, can you answer this or that, I decided to build an AI data analyst that they would be able to chat with instead of me. And my goal for this talk is to show you how basically one can build a data analyst that knows your database structure, that knows your company's context, that can answer questions about your data, because again, that's the final goal. But at the same time, I understand that probably not every one of you will go and do this. Maybe you are not really interested in that and stuff like that. So I actually have a secondary goal. And again, as I mentioned, originally I'm an Android engineer, but recently I found myself playing with AI in Google AI Studio, asking different questions in BigQuery, and even playing with Python notebooks and Kaggle. And again, as an engineer, I find it pretty interesting, actually. And if you haven't worked with these things, I'll show you a few things, how can you do it and why. And hopefully you will try at least one of them, then my goal will be achieved. Oh, and the Google collab. It is here on the list as well. And data. As you can imagine, that's Imagine 3 generating me some picture, but the idea is that I wanted to show that data graphs, we see them everywhere in the form of tables, in form of presentations and slides. And this data can be in different databases. And you may work in different companies, you may use Postgres, it can be hosted in different clouds, or you may be using BigQuery, Snowflake, whatever. And my goal was to make this analyst being able to connect and query ideally any type of data, because SQL is supported almost everywhere, anywhere, and I just wanted it to work with this thing. And again, most of you rose your hand for my question about knowing SQL. And you can argue that, you know what, I actually like writing this thing, select asterisk from barbers were created at. It's not that much of a big deal, right? Agree to some extent. Because to write these SQL queries, you still need to have some interface. And that means that you have another app to juggle. Or, and probably, it requires still knowledge of some SQL. And of course, yeah, these simple things about select asterisk from something is pretty simple. But then when we're talking about window functions, when we're talking about common table expressions and just combining all of this stuff, there is definitely some learning curve. And again, probably an engineer knows how to do it, a product manager, it depends. And again, that's why the goal was to build this AI data analyst that would actually be pretty close to users. And ideally, in our case, we built it for Slack. And the whole goal of this data analyst is to return an answer. But again, you've been on different talks these 2 days, and you know about hallucinations, you know about like stuff that can go wrong. And I mean, even when you ask a real person to get you some answer, sometimes you get something off, just because they don't have enough context or something like that. And that's, I believe, it's important to still return, to still know what is the SQL query that this data is based on. Because someone may not know SQL good enough to write it, but they may be able to just like read these letters and understand, okay, does it look like right, mostly right, and stuff like that. And maybe then escalate if needed. And part one, and that's how I kind of started all of this stuff, was that, okay, let's get a chatbot, Gemini, ChatGPT, Anthropic, whatever is your preference, and ask something like, hey, write me an SQL query to get a rental barber from my DB. Can you imagine what would be the answer? To provide a precise SQL query, we need more information about your database schema. And again, I mean, if someone asked the same question to me, I would answer something between the lines, basically, about the same. And that makes sense, because again, context is everything, and you have it, LLM doesn't have it by default. And it even tried to generate something like select asterisk from barbers, whereas rental equals 1. And while technically that's a perfectly fine SQL expression, that wouldn't work in our database. Why? Because we don't have his rental column, right? And you can imagine it. And okay, number 2, attempt number 2. Write me an SQL query to get a rental barber. My barber table has the following columns. The shops table has shops.kind column, which is again 0 for rental and 1 for commission. That's better. Do you think it would work? I see someone who doesn't believe it, but actually it would, because I mean, why not? Select asterisk from barbers to join shops. Okay, and it kind of, yeah, had to guess about like how these tables are related, and it was a correct guess. So actually this one works. We can argue about this limit 1, does it make sense, doesn't it make sense, or whatever. But again, these actually would return the data. But there is but. Again, here I needed to put this, like I've got this table, I've got that table, and we're talking about a pretty easy case, right? And when we're talking about like a real production database, we are talking about like hundreds of tables. In our case, that's like 200-something tables, and that's 600,000 tokens. And again, if you have visited this like talks, or if you have played with LLM, you know about the context window. Do you know how many LLMs support like 600,000 tokens? The answer is not many. There's definitely like Gemini with 1 or 2 million tokens, but currently OpenAI and Anthropic, they've got like 125K, 200K. So I mean, I wouldn't be even able to just like send all the tables to this thing, so it kind of can chat with me. And I still kind of could, so again, I played with it. And here we come to the first thing that, again, I wanted to highlight, Google AI Studio. Google AI Studio, again, it's like, it has a web UI, it actually works on mobile, just like recently I played with it. I didn't expect that, but it works, that's cool. And a few highlights. Number 1 is system instructions. Probably here, especially again, if you have heard about prompting, you will put something like, you are a data analyst with 10 years of experience, blah, 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 blah. And if you have been on a Bryce talk today, probably you have heard that it actually helps, and there are papers that show that it helps. But anyway, number 2 is a prompt window. Again, usually you would put just like a little bit of text here. Here I put all the like details that I got from my like data grid from JetBrains. But again, that's like a lot of text. 600,000 tokens, as again you can see on the screenshot as well. And number 3 is temperature. You may have heard about temperature, you may not, but the point is that now we want to generate SQL, and that's kind of precise language. So if you put like 1 or 2, I'm not sure if it starts to create poems, but basically it will be kind of trying to. And that's not what you want when you want to generate something like specific. So something between like 0, maybe 0.1, that's what it should be set up there. But anyway, so I've got all these like tables. And I was able to ask a question. For example, generate an SQL query that would return me all rental barbers registered within the last 30 days. Simple question, simple answer, and again, it works. You can find an interesting moment here with the comment, assuming kind 0 indicates a rental shop. And that's another part about the context. As I told you, the first part about the context was that it needs to know your tables. However, again, tables can be structured and generated in different ways. And in our case, this like kind, it was just like an integer. So it's not an enum or something like that, it was an integer. So again, anyway, you need to guess it, or you need to put this data somehow. And we'll touch on this later. But again, it tried to guess, and it actually was right. Or another query, generate an SQL query that would return me all commissioned barbers registered within the last 30 days who had more than 10 bookings. So you see, I mean, it kind of becomes a little bit more complicated, right? And we see here at the bottom part that there is a subquery and select count asterisk, something, something, blah, blah, blah. And again, I did perfectly a working example. And in my experience, it can build you different like unions, it can build you so-called common table expressions, basically making subqueries for subqueries and stuff like that. So again, it can do pretty complex stuff. The challenge, or like a few challenges, and one of them is actually visible on this screen. It's like grayed out now. So can you see, can you understand what can be a challenge when you put all the tables here, 600,000 tokens, and then you ask something? So what can be a problem? Anyone? It's grayed out on the screen, but this is here. Hallucination, yeah, it can be a problem, and again, ideally you need to run it, so yeah, that's a good thing. But actually, I wanted to highlight a little bit different thing. 54 seconds. Is it a lot? Is it a little? I guess it depends, because I mean, if my product manager needed to go to a data analyst, even like on Slack, and ask them something, probably it would have taken more than a minute. Maybe like 24 hours, just because we're a distributed team. We have someone like in East Coast, we have someone in Asia, and yeah, sometimes it happens that a question is asked, and basically next day you get the answer. So it depends. But still, it's not that instant self-serve thing that you can run, especially if in case of hallucinations or something like that, it did something wrong. Ideally, we want to be faster. And another thing is just like a little bit about the pricing. If you're talking about Gemini free, you can use it for free. The Gemini Pro is like 2 requests per minute, the Gemini Flash 15 requests per minute. So again, for small dev projects, or maybe even for some internal tooling, you can even try using it like absolutely for free. When we are talking about the paid option, luckily for us, the input is like 4 times cheaper than the output, but still, if we're talking that a million token is like $1.20, 600 tokens will be like, I don't know, 70 cents, more or less. And if you're talking about 10 product managers asking 10 questions a day, that's like 100, so it's like 70 bucks a day. So you see, it can become like pretty complicated or like pretty expensive, especially if you want to use the Pro model and not the cheaper one, not the Flash. And that's a problem, because I mean, we live in the real world, we need to pay the bills. Luckily for us as for developers, again, if you just want to play with it, or if you want to do something like that just for yourself, AI Studio free tier is, I can actually like even change the word order so it's like a little bit easier to read. So basically, AI Studio is free. So again, as a developer, you can just open this thing, put there like 2 million tokens, send it, send another request, and it will be like absolutely for free for you, and you won't be stopped at this like 2 requests per minute. So again, as an individual, you can easily use it, and it will be good. There is an asterisk that it will be still training on your data, so you should be mindful about it. But nevertheless, for smaller projects, that's completely fine. And I guess, again, there are probably some rate limitations, but again, I just use it as a normal person, so I didn't get into those limitations. And again, tooling highlight, I believe AI Studio is cool for experiments. You can check out different prompt galleries in there, and you can actually fine-tune your model. And again, to do it like for free, and then you can query this model for free. So if you'd like to play with it, that's a good candidate. But we are moving forward. Next thing, BigQuery, and especially like BigQuery Copilot. This is something that I have played with as well. And if you go to the Google site, we see that BigQuery is a fully managed AI-ready data analytics platform that helps you maximize value from your data. But in other words, again, if you have worked with Snowflake, maybe like some Databricks, and I know, like ClickHouse, all these so-called OLAP use cases, when you just need to analyze data, aggregations, and stuff like that, BigQuery is one of the tools that can do it for you. So you don't slow down your production data, and you have faster queries. And do we have like any Android engineers here? Not much. Okay, no one actually. But even me, as an Android engineer, actually I played with this BigQuery like 7 years ago or so. And the case is that, again, you've got some like Python notebooks here and so on, but basically you've got some data. And if you have Google Analytics, if you've got Firebase Analytics or Firebase Crashlytics connected, you can just like with click, set up an ETL pipeline that will move this data from, again, something else to BigQuery, where you can query it. And my use case was that for Firebase Crashlytics, there are crashes, and there were some crashes that I wasn't able to basically find in the standard UI just because it doesn't allow you to query it this way. So again, I just connected this integration, and then I wanted to find my crashes based on this data, and I was able to. And here is a simple example how can something like this be done with Google Analytics data that, again, is exported to BigQuery. For this example, I used a sample database with Google Analytics, but basically there is a button generated with Gemini. You click on it, you put your question, for example, generate me an SQL query to see the referral source distribution of my users in my Google Analytics data. And the issue of this thing not knowing your databases or like your tables is already fixed, because again, that's like built in BigQuery itself. So you just ask a question, you get an answer, you can check out even how much traffic will it use to process. You click on insert, you run it, it works. And by the way, the fact that you run it, it works is already a step forward, because previously, again, with that Gemini, I still needed to get this SQL query and copy paste it somewhere and execute it somewhere else. And here we do everything at one place. So that's pretty convenient. Again, the BigQuery has a free tier. If you want to just like play with it, or if you're a small startup, you can store 10 gigs of data there. You can make 1 terabyte of queries per month for free. And overall, again, that's a good thing to play with if you have never tried to. And one note that I have noticed is that Gemini is free if your project doesn't have a billing account, but if it has a billing account, then by default it will likely be connected to a $75 a month plan. So basically be cautious about it. And if you connect it to it like on the free plan, don't forget to turn it off before you switch your project to like a billing account, just basically to avoid surprises. But again, otherwise, yeah, feel free to do it. And one note later will be about Kaggle notebooks. And just like a heads up for now, that Kaggle notebooks, what's wrong with me, are pretty easy to connect to this BigQuery as well, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. So let's again kind of rehearse what we have discussed so far. So what do we want from this AI analyst based on our experience with like initial chatbot and the BigQuery SQL creator? That we want this analyst to be able to receive a question, then to generate an SQL, execute it, and display the results. I think that's it. Yes. So yeah, that's what we want to achieve. And let's see how can we do it. And the first problem, or the first question is, how can we give the bot, the AI, the table structure? And one of the options to do it, in addition to just like throwing everything in context, is to utilize so-called RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation. Can you please raise a hand if you have heard about it and more or less understand it? Okay, like half of the audience. I guess in 2 words, for those who don't know, the idea is that there are special databases called vector databases. Basically, we put our data somehow in these databases, and then, again, somehow, magically, we can get data that is similar to the data that we put there. And as a result, with tools like LangChain, for example, we can create prompts. For example, given the following database schema context, generate an SQL query to answer the question, return only the SQL query without any explanation. And then when we call this, again, LangChain command or something like that, we provide context question there, where context we have extract from a database, and again, question is the question that user sent us. But that's kind of the bare bones implementation of how can you achieve something like this. Again, get data somewhere, send it, add a question to it, and instead of just like sending it all the tables, it will send you only the tables that kind of make sense, and it will try to find it based on the words. For example, if there is a word barber in it, if there is a word appointment, if it was about appointment, and stuff like that. But again, it is still a pretty manual process, and I guess LangChain is one step of abstraction above just like writing it absolutely manually. But again, I'm a director of engineering, so that means that now I am more of a manager than of an engineer, and I kind of value time, and time is money and stuff like that. So I just found a solution that does all of these things for me. And there are a few of them, of course. One of them is called Van AI, and that's an open source library. And it can be connected to any or like most of the reasonable kind of databases. It can be connected to any LLM APIs. It has a few pre-created UIs, and that's, I believe, the weakest point of the solution for now. There is something on like Streamlit for Python. There is, I believe, a React or Next.js app. There is a very, very, very simple Slack bot. But basically, I understood that, OK, as long as I've got the logic handled, I can do the UI. It's not that of a big deal. And again, in 2 words, the whole flow looks like when we created and set up like different keys and connection strings to a database. Then we connect to a database. Then we train it, and we'll talk about it soon a little bit. Yeah. And then we just ask questions. And for questions, again, we get the answers, and that's basically the whole flow. And there is a Kaggle notebook that you can, again, like take a picture of right now, or maybe you can use Pixel 2 AI Analyst. And actually, I'll just like for a second, we'll move to this laptop, and we'll show how it looks like. And I was told that I will not be visible on the screen, but okay. So, AI Analyst. This is a Kaggle notebook, and I tried to make it pretty much self-explanatory. If you look at it, you will see a table of contents, so basically introduction, prerequisites, setup, creating your own custom Vanna class, connecting to the database, interacting, and so on. So again, all the things that I have used to create this thing that, again, like Data Analyst, you can use it. You'll need to specify your Gemini API key and Vanna API key. There is, again, an instruction how to do it and stuff like that. And then when you like set up all of these things, here I connected to a temporary like test database that's hosted by Vanna itself, and it's about sales of some like musical records. And the point is that, again, when you set up everything, and you can follow along the Kaggle notebook to do this, you'll be able to just like ask questions. For example, what are the top 10 albums by sales? And now I've got an SQL prompt, and I've got a debug version, so I have a little bit more in logs here. But if you look at it, you will see that you are an SQLite expert. Please help to generate SQL query to answer the question. And that's basically the system prompt that we have discussed before, right? And it's already pre-built into Vanna, so you don't even need to actually care about it. Later, you'll see tables. Create table, album, foreign keys, constraints, blah, 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 blah. And that's basically the part that I mentioned before, that we want to show this like and send this database to your LLM. And again, all of this is also happening under the hood. You will only need to train it. And I'll talk about training soon. And afterwards, basically, you see the prompt is like pretty long. It's like 3,000 tokens or 4,000 tokens, depending on the size of your database and stuff like that. But again, this prompt is automatically generated by Vanna. And at the end, that's what we've got. Okay, LLM response. Select blah, blah, blah from inner join, group by, order by. So it generates the query, as we discussed. And there is actually a special like post-processing that also cleans up the query and makes sure that it works. And at the end, you get the results. Okay, album ID, title, total sales. So basically, whatever I have asked for, I don't only get the SQL query, but I also get the results. And that's like cool. It actually tries to use Plotly on Python basically to also draw it. For whatever reason, on this run, it didn't work. So, that happens. That's something to be like ready for. But again, you can play with it later. And in our case, on Slack, I don't actually send the Plotly things, and I'll show it to you a little bit later. And again, just a quick note in terms of training. Okay, it looks like that's not the latest Kaggle file that I've got. But in 2 words, again, you say like, hey, Vanna train on this SQL, Vanna train on this domain knowledge, and you just like write simple strings there. And Vanna train on database schema, something like that. And you do it once. It is again stored in a vector database. There are some vector databases that are just plain SQL, plain files that are based on SQLite. So you can even host them just like in the usual local storage. Or you can use a hosted version for this vector database. But anyways, that's kind of this thing in the gist. And as a result, that's what we've got. That's, again, a Slack bot that we've got at Squire. And my question was, how many bookings we had from platforms starting with Rock On? And Rock, that was a new project that we have just delivered, so we wanted to understand how many bookings were there. And we see, again, chat with database created some SQL query, sent me results. By the way, yeah, here you can note my comment, and that's like my, I don't know, comments that I made, up to 30 rows and 6 columns. Because yeah, initially when it started generating me something, I don't know, hallucinations, bad prompting or whatever, but it sometimes returns or like trying to return me like, I don't know, 1,000 lines or something like this. And I just like, okay, probably it's not the best way to handle it via Slack. So I just like limited it manually that now I always add this like limit 30. And again, most of the questions, if you think about it, they will be either aggregations, like count something, or maybe just, I don't know, like give me top 10. So again, in most of the cases, it shouldn't be the problem. But again, in some cases, it was for me. So I just like added this step manually for my requests. Or give me a select query returning barbers of brands where those brand subscription status past due. And again, you can notice this like last part sounds a little bit technical, and it is actually a little bit technical, because in theory, I could have just asked like, hey, give me like brands that are past due, or like give me barbers with subscriptions past due. And again, there is a pretty good chance that it would have worked, but just because, I mean, I'm an engineer, I know how it works, it is easier for me to be sometimes maybe a little bit too technical and too explicit, but at least like to get the answer from the first shot, how it's called, like with chatting with these LLMs. And again, I got a pretty, I don't know, like mid-size, not too complex, but not too easy query as well, with a few joins. And again, for example, a product manager, at least like some of them in my team, they wouldn't know where to look at this data. So again, out of like these 200 tables, it may not even be a problem of like writing this query, but they just may not know how the data is connected and basically where to look at. And this thing knows, just because again, I sent it everywhere, everything. Or something like we've got some JSONs, and this thing is again like smart enough to go into JSON and parse it and extract something, and again, and it works. And I did these like simple things with, I don't know, vertical lines and stuff like that. So again, it looks maybe not like as the most beautiful thing, but it works, and that's what matters. And I believe that this thing is not only good for just like, again, outsourcing this, answering the questions based on your database, but it's actually cool in terms of onboarding new team members. Because first of all, yes, again, they can just like ask it and get some data. But also they can learn where the data is stored. Because again, like as we looked at the previous examples, now I know that, okay, this is like, this query consists of these tables. We can quickly see what changes in the database based on some like API queries. When you are trying to understand, okay, I made this API query, what actually changed? You can do this, and so on. And just like to get back from the start, SQL Assistant evolution. If you would, for whatever reason, you want to go the same way, I'd like you to remember these kind of steps. And they are also, again, the earlier the step, the easier it is, right? You can always just go to chatbot to generate an SQL. You can provide it some table structure, or maybe somehow all table structures. But eventually, if you want to make it actually useful and easy to use, you will likely need to teach it to actually run queries, and you will need to put it somewhere where your actual users are. Product managers, other team members, and again, even other developers who are like iOS engineers and who have no idea how and where this data is stored. Now they can ask a bot something like, hey, give me a test user that has, again, like this amount of bookings, or that have, well, like these specific settings, and they get a user ID, and then they go into like our admin panel and switch the password, and now they have a test user just basically to use it as a test user. So again, I believe that the use cases are pretty broad, and that's cool. And here is a diagram from Van AI. And again, I believe that it shows the overall idea kind of, and there are different solutions, and again, you can do something like that on LangChain if for whatever reason you prefer building your own bicycles. And it will consist of two parts, basically. On the left, it's about training. So you put there your database structure, you put there some documentation. For example, again, what is a commission barber, what is a rental barber. And at Squire, we've got a studio barber who is a rental barber, who is the only one in a shop, where that shop is the only one in the brand, or something like that. And I mean, this is not even something that you can just like understand from a table, even like as a human being. You just need this context. And there are reference SQL queries. Because again, even at Squire, we have different people. Some people like to do like my table as S, this table as B, and then you see this like B something, A something. I hate this style, actually. I prefer having like proper table names in these joins and stuff. But again, you can train this model. Okay, that's how I prefer this SQL queries to be built. Or this is how you can answer this specific question, just because it's like complicated. And again, you may have noticed that even if like a person data analyst may not be able to build some of the queries just because they don't understand all the like intricacies of basically these things. And you can show it like, okay, here's an example question, here's an example SQL answer, and stuff like that. And all of this like part from training, it gets into vector database, and then again, your bot can receive some questions, generate or actually extract this required data from vector database. This data will be put into prompt, again, with your help, or just like automatically with thing like a Van AI or like chat with DB. And eventually you'll get an SQL, and you'll need to execute this SQL. And a few considerations that, one, again, everyone needs broader context, and they just like talked about it, that LLM needs context, a real human being needs context, and when trying to understand what kind of data you need to put, I would recommend you to just like think about you. If you were given this like question, what information would you need to be able to answer it? And that's usually a good idea to be able to put this into like an LLM's context and just like again train it with it at least once. To give or not to give. In Van, there is a setting that says like, okay, do you give the LLM access to your data or not? And why it is important? Because again, when you made the first request, you got some data, and sometimes you want to tweak it. And there are multiple approaches again how to do it. As a human being, most likely you would just like copy paste all the errors and send it back like to the system, so again it can regenerate something. If you are more cautious about what do you send to LLM, you can set it up so that LLM only sees the structure of your data but doesn't see the data. But again, sometimes you are fine with like, okay, here was the answer, here is why it's wrong, basically, okay, regenerate my query. And yeah, that's again one of the considerations. And security. One of the things that I was uncomfortable with is that what if this auto kind of execution executes me like delete something? Probably it wouldn't be able to do like a RMRF, but I mean, there are delete queries, right? And who stops LLM from like creating these delete queries or update queries and stuff like that? And again, that may be your goal at some moment, so it does this thing as well. But in my case, I just like made sure that I give it the like user with only read access to the database. But even on top of that, just in case in my code, I just like, okay, if that's not a select query, basically, then don't execute it, just in case, because you never know. And all this like Terminator stuff thing, when, I don't know, a bot deleted your prod database, that's definitely not something that you will like to see. And just a few one-line notes. So again, interest in the bot, message me. I didn't create it initially, at least like to be like fully open source and stuff like that. If I got enough requests, I have an agreement that we can actually do it. But again, I like what was built there, but still, again, there's like, when you want to open source something, you need to like put more effort on it. So again, if I get some like pings, I may finalize this. Otherwise, it will be just like an internal tool for us. Again, you can build absolutely the same thing with LangChain. You can just like do your Python, JS, whatever logic to do it manually. You can use other tools such as, okay, it will be later like chat with DB, I believe. And of course, there are like paid tools that do something like that. And that's actually interesting that I believe that with function calling, and yeah, function calling, if you don't know, now you can ask LLM to generate you a special like string that you can basically then use to call functions. And I can imagine now that you can create a single prompt that would call a function basically to get some context again for your tables, and then call another function to get this data from the database and stuff like that. And that's interesting. If I will have more time, maybe I will even try to do the same with just like a single prompt, and it can actually be possible in a few iterations with function calling. But that's not what I did. Then again, there is a library chat2db, seemingly does absolutely the same thing. And again, you may be willing to check it out as well if you decide to go this way. If you see a few phones, okay, cool. So that's actually about it. So again, my name is Artur Kuzmin. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn, on Twitter, somewhere. And this picture, that's actually a picture that leads to my GitHub, where I've got my presentations. Older ones are primarily about Android. And again, I became manager, so I've got some talks about leadership, productivity, and stuff. And probably latest talks for the last 2 years or so will be about AI, LLMs, prompting, and so on. So yeah, I am kind of trying to keep up with trends. Thank you for your attention. Any questions? Okay. Yeah, do we have a mic here, or how does it work? Oh, okay, here is the mic, so yeah, feel free to come to the mic, yeah, and who had like another question, yeah, you can just queue.
Okay, I have two questions. One is, you see, you see the metadata of the databases is kind of confidential information of the company, and some may not be willing to share with to train it through Vina AI or Gemini AI.
Yep.
Is it possible to feed this information, train the model locally, such as inside local machine, and deploy a small-sized LLM and
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a great question. So basically the question is, if I want to keep everything like 100% secure, and I don't want to share this data even like with Google or like OpenAI, even if they claim that they don't train on your data, can we do it locally? And the answer is yes. And Vanna AI specifically, it has these connectors that you can connect it maybe even to local llama or something like that. So again, you can use local vector database. And again, I forgot the name, but there are local vector databases to store this data, and there are local LLMs. And you can set up again either manually, either with Vanna, and connect all of this so it works like completely locally within your private network and stuff like that.
Okay. The second question is, you see the table schema or the metadata of the database is changing from time to time, and how to monitor the changes and reflect these changes on the LLM instantly?
That's a good question. This is the challenge that I haven't solved myself yet. I guess it consists of two parts. One part is basically to understand that something has changed, and second one is to fix it. In case of Vanna, because each and every line, again, like technically how does it look like that your DDLs is like one line, one DDL. So you can A, manually update it in your vector database, and B, then we are talking about a system like change management system. How can we understand that something helped or changed? And I see again two solutions there. Solution number one, check out if something failed and then basically then fix it. And if you just like have a simple error monitoring for this like LLM, you can check it out from time to time. And B, you can put some hooks on your database, basically, that whenever these hooks happen, or maybe again you have some like migration systems in place and stuff like that, to ping somewhere. And again, I wouldn't care about it too much unless you've got, I know, like 100 developers and like database schema changes, I don't know, on a daily basis. Most likely, again, it still happens, I know, once a week at most, twice a week. Probably, again, database is relatively, I mean, stable, right? And then again, just someone will need to maintain it. And first, again, you just like see, okay, database changed, let me update this thing. Then you understand that, okay, maybe it became like too troublesome to do this manually, so let me automate it. But that's, again, how I would solve this problem. So again, before there is a problem, I wouldn't solve it. And yeah, that's our case at this moment.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you for a very informative session. I have a couple of questions, but I only ask two of them, and then I will ask.
Okay, a couple of questions is exactly two, just in
Yeah.
case, but okay.
So there was a slide mentioned Vanna.train, but I didn't see any training information on the slides, and it was, to me, zero-shot prompting, isn't it?
Give me a second. From one point of view, that's zero prompt. I mean, okay. Depending on what you mean by train. First of all, again, in kind of vocabulary of Vanna, training is that when you give it this like DDLs and documentation and context, so it stores it in a vector database. You do it once, and again, as it was asked, you update it from time to time when needed. But the second one, is it a zero shot or few shot? It is kind of zero shot by default. And again, it will utilize and it will extract this data from a vector database, but it will be zero shot. But then, actually, you can still continue the thread. And I believe that just like recently, there was an update in Vanna that did it for you. But basically, what I did for a bot, that I just like looked at the previous answer, concatenated it with a like new question, and this way I kind of achieved this few shot prompting. And maybe it's not even like about this. But again, depending on like what we're talking about. So if you're talking about a few shot prompting when you have multiple examples, again, just because you already have these examples in your vector database, so technically it will be few shot prompting like from the beginning. And it will be in that like Kaggle notebook that I have shared.
There is no changing of the weight of the language model itself, right? We don't change the weight of Gemini by training it. We just
Oh, you mean like fine-tuning or something like
Yes,
that? Yeah,
exactly.
no, we don't touch that part.
And the second question, as far as I understood, the model is already running in production in your company, but
Yeah.
I didn't see any evaluation on the bot. Is there any detail that you can provide about the accuracy of the SQL, generated SQL?
Yeah.
Because we cannot just leave it alone and say it might work, it might not, because it might mislead the people that they are trying to get some information, which will have a negative effect.
That's a good question. Now it is kind of in an internal like test mode. So if you've noticed for like some of that chats, there was like upvote and downvote. And the idea is that basically I'm looking at it, some other people are looking at it, and we're just like upvoting and downvoting this thing to understand how can we change the, again, like underlying logic or training data further. Because one of the things was with like LLMs, you can achieve so-called, I forgot the word, but basically when you've got too much data or it's just like too close. And there were, for example, some queries that were very big and very complicated.
Right.
And as a result, the thing tried to mimic them. And we just like removed them from the database.
But it hasn't been evaluated.
Yeah, we don't have a kind of solid evaluation thing because we are kind of mid-sized small startup and it's just like, okay,
Yeah, sure.
thumbs up, thumbs down in the Slack.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Cool.
So I was looking at your Kaggle that you showed before, and I saw something about Plotly. And I was wondering, does this AI also do data visualization?
It does some basic data visualization. I mean, as part of Vanna, there is, yes, some basic data visualization that you can create like columns or something like that. But again, I didn't find it particularly useful because it tries to do it always, and it doesn't always guess what would be the best visualization for this kind of data, at least I believe. And that's why, yeah, I didn't get deep into that stage.
So
but it does something.
What would happen if the client says, oh, I want a time series of, let's say, the barber profit per month? Can it do that?
That's a good question that I haven't checked out, basically. I would expect that it may be able to do this based on the, again, like graphs and stuff. Because, again, it would need to create a table with like dates. It would need to create a table with, again, like amount of bookings or whatever. And it uses this like basic Plotly things. So, again, I would expect that to some extent, yeah, that should work out of the box. But again, it's not something that we thought is a big deal because, again, that's an internal tool, so we don't kind of have the client. We have just like, yeah, internal team who is using it.
Okay. I was also thinking, like, can it also, for example, you have a database of, let's say, stock price data, right? And for example, this is another client example, but let's say your clients found out that prices were dropping at like 2020. And can the client then ask, oh, why did the prices drop at 2020? And can like Gemini then source Google and say, oh, 2020 was a COVID year. So that it can like do grounding and says, this source says X, Y, and Z. Can AI do that?
That's a good question. I mean, as an engineer, you can of course build it. That's not something that Vanna has out of the box, as I know. And just like this thing with stock prices, I found it just like funny because I don't know if anyone saw that video about like prices going up and down and the person commenting them like, okay, here they go up and here they go down. So I mean, I'm not sure if you can like explain these stock prices movements overall, but yeah, the answer to this question is that Vanna doesn't do it like outside of the box, but again, you can build it, yeah, if you'd like to.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Cool. And we are actually at time, so yeah, you can find me somewhere like around. And thank you, everyone. Have a good day.